Hi, Tammy. It's Angela from Advanced Net.
Hi, how are you?
I'm trying to talk over the grinding noise my computer is making.
It's okay.
Can I make you a host?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
All right. Thank you. And then I'm going to go on to the next one and get it started. I don't know if you can hear that. It's just embarrassing. I have an appointment with Geek Squad on Saturday. All right, you're now host. We're recording, so it's just a matter of letting people in the room. Have a great session.
Thank you. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye. Hello. You're on mute. Try holding your space bar. Just hold it, and then you should be able to speak.
Yeah. Okay. No, is Andrea
coming?
There you
go. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Is Andrea coming?
I'm not sure. Okay.
Because I can't put up my shared thing without her since I sent the stuff to her.
Oh.
I'm one of the antediluvian ones who does not know how to share data.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. Do you happen to have it? And if you do, you can email it to me, and then I can pull it up for you. If that's
all right, I'll try that then.
Okay.
All right, let me see how I do this. It's stuck.
Let me know when you get to your email, and then I'll give you my email address.
All right, sure. Weird. Okay. All right, go ahead.
T Greer, Greer.
Oh, wait a minute, I'm going to do something else. Just a moment.
Okay. Are you sure? Because I can walk you through it on the screen. It's okay.
No, okay. Well, maybe you could, but given my acuity with these kinds of things, okay, so go ahead.
T Greer, Greer.
Go ahead with your email. T Green?
Greer, Greer. Like
Greer.
Pam
I'm sorry.
Greer.
Yeah, Greer. I know.
Yeah. Okay. At cau.edu.
At cau.edu. G-R-I-E-R.
Two E's. Greer.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm not going to put any explanation. I'll just send it.
Yeah.
Okay. You have it?
Not yet.
Coming through Howard. Howard has a delayed process.
I got. I have it.
How do I get you back?
Okay. So if you're okay, I am more than happy to allow you to go first.
Thank you.
Sure.
You said what? You're more than happy to
allow you to go first, if that's okay.
All right.
I don't know if anyone is anyone on the call, the tech moderator.
I think it's Andra, and she's not on.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. We can just get started, and we'll just monitor ourselves. How about that?
All right. How much time do I have?
So we're supposed to go until 6:30. So you want to take like no more than 20 minutes?
Oh God, no. We'll take less than that.
Okay,
I haven't finished my research because I had the usual computer ate my homework problems lost my computer and what else? Oh, had a plumbing problem today, so I'm stuck in the kitchen. But anyway, back to this. This research focuses on a polling center that Howard developed in 2016, looking at Black voters. At that time, there was no other group looking nationally at Black voters only or primarily. And so our first results, which were done with the National Newspaper Publishers Association, a Black group, were spread through them. But other than that, we were, given the constraints of Howard, not given a separate identity. We call ourselves HP HIPPO, Howard Institute for Public Opinion. Now it's a Howard Initiative for Public Opinion. At any rate, we've continued collecting data on Black social and political behavior. It's a multidisciplinary group, and we looked at Black voter opinion at the end of October in 2020, as well as we had done in 2016. Unfortunately, I have not been able to analyze much of the data because of all the other problems I've alluded to, but there's some things I want to point to, and the arguments that I have go based on patterns I'd like to suggest from looking at data up to 2016, and that I think are confirmed or at least supported by the data we have on 2020. Our sample included just under 1,000 Black voters nationally in 2016. We did other polls, one on COVID-19 and political interest, and some on other medical issues of similar size. And then this last one in 2020 was different because it had 1,200 respondents of Black and Black Latinx dimensions, which were divided into two separate groups. And I'm only going to report on the Black African American non-Latinx respondents just for the sake of time. And so there are basically three arguments that I would like to make that will probably not be fulfilled here. One is something that I think is pretty clear, that Black voting patterns since the 1980s or even since the 1960s have been fairly sustained growth patterns, dipping largely in conflict or in response to major racial issues. Obviously, one of them would be voter suppression, and growing largely in response to major racial issues, but not growing in response to things that are indirectly related racial issues very significantly. So I would argue that Black voter turnout, we're only talking about turnout, is issue sensitive, and it is more issue sensitive than it is candidate sensitive. So that while many people reacted to 2008, I think that reactions to Black First are simply reactions to the extent to which Black First symbolize issues, but in and of themselves, they don't actually mobilize people significantly. And I'll come back to the reason for that. And so the third argument I'd like to make is that the individualistic focus on Black candidates in elections is more consistent with mainstream politics than it is with traditional African-American movement-based politics. And the mainstream I'm describing as a sort of traditional pragmatism. And just as a background to reporting on the data that I can discuss, I think party pragmatism grows out of the reaction to Reconstruction and the Compromise of 1877. It's a compromise that, to my mind, limits the disruptive effects of ideology on party conflict. And it does so by using the key to ideological divisions that race provides, because race intersected at the time with so many economic and labor and social and even gender issues. I think the two-party system and race were, in that pragmatic focus, were threatened by the issues around Roosevelt, the New Deal, et cetera, but they were able to retain their position by using race again, the stable stability of party pragmatism, to block the disruptive effects of ideological division. As many of you know, the 30s and the New Deal excluded, to start off with, Black inclusion in many of the developmental programs as a way of moderating the threat for social and progressive issues. Finally, I think that pragmatic foundation, again, was brought into contest by Reagan as a response to the civil rights progress. And then you begin to get a challenge to traditional party pragmatism. That emerges, and if I can show the first graph on the screen, it emerges, if you see the pattern of Black voter turnout, and Blacks are the blue line and the second line, it is generally the same as white voter turnout. using census data, the only time it goes down, as opposed to what I call a relatively consistent pattern of going up in relationship to white voter turnout, significantly is 1988 and 84 to 88. And any of you who are old enough, if there are any, will remember those were the years in which the Democratic Party, our major source, was at the final election period threatened by the rejection of Jesse Jackson. So that by the time you get to 88 and Dukakis, if any of you are around to remember the meetings between, or the failed meetings between Jesse Jackson and Dukakis, they permeated throughout the Black electorate. So Dukakis was very low appeal, and the lowness of the appeal had to do with the failings of the response to which was the first racial presence. And this first, again, is by Jesse Jackson's symbolism of racial issues, because nobody thought seriously that he was the candidate in a viable way. Second point along this line, and if you look at figure one, you pass, good. The Black voter turnout, it's exaggerated, obviously, because polling tends to give people's expectation. You have over 88% claiming they've either voted or already voted. But what is credible here is the 40% who have already say they will definitely vote. And later on, you see other data that would indicate that. But the point I wanted to make with this comes out in reflecting on 2016, and we'll stay here for a moment, but the point is that 2012, 2016, everyone said in the last presidential election that blacks had turned out more, they would have saved Hillary. Well, I think blacks turned out more than any traditional pattern would expect them to. It is disrupted by the 2012 voter turnout. Obviously, everyone said that 2008 boosted Black voter turnout. Now, here to go back to don't go back to physically, but to go back to the graph above, that graph I used to show consistency over time. But census data, as many of you know, is always off a bit. And then in this case, the numbers are higher. Basically, the Hillary vote in 2016, in terms of voter turnout, Black voter turnout, was like the Black voter turnout in 2008, although here it looks like it's more like 2004. The point to be made is that Obama's Big Bang was 2012. And I want to argue that it was not so much the candidate, again, it is the issues. What happened between 2008 and 2012? And we try to get this from some of the recollections of the respondents and other questions, which I haven't been able to show, is that the salience of race nationally, the repression of the Black vote in places like North Carolina and Wisconsin was everywhere. And we were on the verge of the Shelby County decision in 2013. So that for Black voters, it was no longer Obama's biggest success was not Obama's, it was the salience of race that his presence had helped unleash. And part of that had to do with what happened to the white vote. And there's not enough talk about young white male voters in this period. I'll come back to in a moment, because my research has tried to look at other surveys and compare the data. But the salience of race as a national issue involving a race-conscious white electorate begins to penetrate in this period. And obviously it readies the field after 2016, for somebody like Trump, which we can all sort of recognize. And the Shelby decision sort of put a stop to that, I would argue, meaning it settled the issue. Racism was now surfaced and here to stay. In 2016, I think racism is individualized. Our survey, which I don't show here, the response asked people if they thought Trump was a racist. And something like 87% of the respondents said they thought they were. We presented these survey results with a newspaper, Pollers Association, at the National Press Club. And I can remember one Black reporter was outraged that we would ask a question like that. Who could ever say that Trump was? This was 2016. The point here is not so much whether or not he was or wasn't. The point was the individualization of it. And I would argue that what seemed like a low level of support for Trump, around 7 or 8%, and then again, it's not shown in these data, but it's shown in ours. Well, our poll actually showed only 3%, but of course that was just before the election. What seemed like a low level of support may have to do with what happens later in 2020. Did we look at figure 2? Yeah, we did. that figure 2 is not figure 2. I'm sorry. Go down, go down. Okay, we did. Go to figure 3. Yeah. Okay, that's good. That's good. Most of the data is reported in these breakdowns that I don't show you, but I thought I would put it here just to look at the differences in preference. And I was surprised, and I heard this when I think it was Ray Block and others reported survey results with David Wilson, that Biden only got 85% of the Black, 87% or something of the Black vote. And this is just before, so I don't know what the actual vote was, but I think polling is more significant even off time than exit polling. The biases of weighting that come with exit polling are tremendous, and I discussed those in the paper, but I can't here. The point here is what is astonishing, how 0.13% of Blacks could have voted for Trump is beyond me or most. But when you think about it in the context of what I call racism is the symbolic individualization of racism, Trump purified the system and made it less racist in the perspective, I suspect, of many of these percent. All of a sudden, Trump was in housing incorporating all of the racism. So people could hate him and still not go to the polls. And those who didn't hate him, the conservatives generally saw him as a symbol of traditional American politics. I'm not obviously explaining that 13% by any overwhelming number, except to say that a large increase in Black voter turnout may have been discouraged against Trump by the very fact that Trump, the electorate, meaning the white American electorate, was seen as overwhelmingly anti-Trump in terms of the immediate exposure, even though that he had that core group. And I may be biased in DC because in the neighborhood I live, which is a lot of white, now majority white, I remember seeing only one Trump sign and into 2020. And then I looked more closely and I realized I hadn't seen the F word that was in front of it. So that there was never any great support for the white electorate in those where the Black community lives, I'll put it that way. When I go to Florida, where my siblings have homes and I do, there is that support, but then there are no Black people. So it doesn't come to them. If you go to figure, we're already at figure 3 or figure 4. Let's see here. Okay. You see that issues are not atypical of Americans in terms of the electorate. We just a range of issues, and these are the top ones that they responded to, and they could respond in multiple levels. COVID-19 is salient, and racial justice is second. When you ask them in another question that I don't show here, what the government should do, racism is first, so that you get this sense that the nature and source of responsibility can be individualized as well. However, whether or not people go to the polls, I suggest, whether or not they act, is based on how pervasive they feel it is. On figure 4, oh, that is figure 4, I'm sorry. On figure 5, a little insight into one of the issues. We looked at a number of things, and I may have how the method that people voted in, and also whether or not Trump's behavior about he's not going to accept the elections would affect them. And it was just noteworthy that his refusal to accept the results, or his claim, did seem to statements or beliefs about what people would do. The reason I note that is because of a survey results from a different survey that I looked at, not shown here, about white male voters that I referred to earlier. There is an inexplicably large surge in white male voter turnout in 2016. And one of the reasons I think that, especially in the states of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, where Black votes seem to be deficient to support save Hillary, or even in Michigan, other than the obvious threats to voting rights in places like Wisconsin and Michigan, there is this sense in which that very refusal may have gone with a race consciousness in the white electorate that's unusual. And the high voter turnout was historically, according to the Tufts survey, never seen among young white males, who surpassed young white females in voter turnout, and that's striking. Lastly, because I probably am getting close to the end of the time, we did a survey, what happened to figure 6? Oh, figure 6. Figure 6. Okay, thanks. Obviously, the conditions in the environment change people, and you can see why any good Trump, like Republican, would want to get rid of early voting and mail ballot voting. There were other questions that showed that most people reacted negatively to joy and other things, but it's clear that these things, I think, help to maintain among those people who did vote, who did show up to vote, a consciousness of race consciousness in the electorate. And that's why so many of them may have been mutually benefited by the availability of voting by mail or early voting, but also inspired by it as a kind of racial coming together. And lastly, on figure 7, one of the odd things in the survey, and a big issue on the individualism side, I suppose, though not necessarily consistent with what I'm saying, is that whether or not the vice president strengthened the ticket, and it would be probably less impressive for Harris if I had the Pence data up there, but most people said that Harris strengthened the ticket. I'm struck by the 16% who thought she weakened the ticket, whether that is something like the 13% who voted for Trump, the sense in which the presence of race is anything but a distraction from the normal course of politics. I don't know. But anyway, I just want to emphasize that the issue-based nature of Black voter turnout is different from the preferences in the party. And I think that that's something to be kept in mind, even if it doesn't always show up. Thank you. How many minutes? Okay. You're muted.
Sorry, that was about 17 minutes. Apologies.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, it's good. Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Tammy Greer, a professor of political science at Clark Atlanta University. And what I would like to share with you this evening is about the transition of Georgia, and hopefully to dispel some of the rose-colored perspective that we have about the great state of Georgia. So what we have, let me switch this over, please. Okay. So what we currently have here in Georgia is a transition that we all can agree upon, yet, to what extent is there? So if we look at this is the total number of registered voters, and these are registered as of the general election in these particular years, in 98 all the way through 2020. So these are the folks that were registered at the time of the general election in November. We have different data points depending on the year. Where we have a presidential year, there may have been several cycles of data collected for the number of registered voters, because depending on a primary or a runoff or what have you, so those items could differ. Yet and still, these are the numbers at the general election time in November of these specific years. This other number is the number of active voters that at the time of the general election in Georgia. And then, of course, the lower numbers, the lower bars, are the number of inactive voters. And you could see when it comes to here in 2016, that there's a large spike. So there's always been, some 6-digit number of inactive voters in Georgia. So other than 2016, where you had over 1 million inactive registered voters, in 2002, you came close to 1 million with over 960,000 individuals who are inactive. And of course, we look at inactive voters as those voters at the time that were inactive in an election cycle, 5 election cycles. And of course, that has changed recently to 9 election cycles still. These are those voters that are registered to vote, yet have been inactive. So when you add, of course, these 2 bar graphs together, then you get this top number. One of the items that concerns me being in Georgia is folks are saying, this was the largest turnout in Georgian history. This is because we have increasing growth in Georgia, right? So we can't say, wow, 7 million people were registered to vote in Georgia. Yeah, because the population had increased in Georgia. So we have to, keep that into perspective and not necessarily just look at the number in and of itself. In the January 5th, 2021 runoff election results, one of the items to really keep in mind as well is that, please stop referring to Georgia as a blue state. Georgia isn't, because the state overall voted for the current president, and we have 2 Senate seats that are Democratic. Every single statewide race in Georgia, other than our 2 Senate races, are Republican. Our General Assembly, which is our legislative branch, is still Republican majority. So Georgia is not a blue state. So when we look at the runoff results, we see that Democratic candidate John Ossoff against David Perdue, Sonny Perdue was our former governor. That vote difference was, just under 56,000. Yet in that same race, on that same ballot, in that, same election day, the difference between Raphael Warnock and Kelly Loeffler was just above 93,000 votes. So to say that Georgia's blue one would argue that the races for the special election would have ended up being consistent, right? Where you have your numbers to be consistent with the number of votes cast for your Democratic candidate, yet and still we didn't have that. And we had 3 races on the ballot. And those 3 races we had on the ballot were the regular Senate race. We had a special election for the Senate, and then we had a statewide office for Public Service Commission. Interestingly, these 2 Senate races went Democratic, yet our Public Service Commissioner, that race went toward the Republican. So it's very different in terms of, how can Georgia be blue when you have such stark differences in the number of votes cast. In Metropolitan Atlanta, there are 10 counties, and these are the 10 counties that make up Metropolitan Atlanta. And of the 10 counties that make up Metropolitan Atlanta, Cherokee County and Fayette County were the only 2 counties out of the entire metropolitan space that did not vote Democratic. And so what does that look like? For the 2 counties, you see that these are the number of votes that were cast in Cherokee County, and this is for Raphael Warnock. And here you have for Kelly Loeffler, and this is Warnock's total in Fayette County, and this is Loeffler's vote total in Fayette. And then you have the similar over here with Ossoff and Perdue in Cherokee, Ossoff and Perdue in Fayette. These numbers are very interesting in understanding who lives in these counties, right? So the vast majority of the people that live in these 2 counties are white. So they have a small proportion of Black voters here in Cherokee and Fayette County. So, we can understand these totals as they come. At the same time, there's a growing trend of Fayette County in particular getting more and more Black residents. And one could argue that the people that are moving inside of Fayette, particularly those that are Black, are moving there because they're being pushed out of the city of Atlanta proper because of gentrification, which is driving down the number of Black people inside of city of Atlanta proper. So when we look closer, particularly at Cherokee and Fayette, in terms of the participation rate, the Black participation rate is about 94%, yet it is very small. The participation rate in Cherokee is very large. The number of people in Cherokee, whites in Cherokee is large compared to Blacks, obviously. Yet what is overwhelming the population in Cherokee County is white voters that are 65 and older. So they make up a large portion of the registered voters and actual voters inside of Cherokee County. And then when we come over here to Fayette County, you see that the participation rate is similar, yet there's, you see the difference between the Black registered voters and the white registered voters. So why is this a thing that to discuss about the way that the state looks and then the politics of Georgia overall? We're looking at this because we have this newfound interest in Georgia and how Georgia politics are shifting yet remain the same. And so part of it is we need to understand where the folks are that are living here. And also to get to the point to be realistic about what those politics looks like, because we have so many individuals that are in our General Assembly who are looking to change the voting laws and to add additional restrictions here. Part of that is because, those folks that turned out to vote in 2021 for the runoff election, who turned out to vote in the 2020 general election, there is consistent hesitation of whether or not those folks are going to turn out in 2022 when Georgia General Assembly is up for re-election, as well as the constitutional offices within Georgia, the governor, secretary of state, and all of those statewide positions, if they're going to show up. Because we come into this space when we look at the participation, when we look at the politics and the laws that are passed in Georgia, that it appears as though there continues to be a growing minority in terms of who has power. Yet the growing minority is continuously creating structures inside of city and state government in order for them to maintain power, even when they're no longer in the majority. And what we continue to see is that we are not focusing on the state and local perspective of our politics. We continuously look toward the federal system without a clear understanding of how the 10th Amendment and the ability for the states to control the vast majority of the laws that control our day-to-day lives. So when we think of Georgia and when we think of people having interest in Georgia, part of that interest needs to go beyond a federal office. It also needs to look at from the state perspective, as well as to understand in 2022, Warnock is going to be on the ballot again because his seat is not in cycle. It's also interesting to note that of the counties that John Ossoff won, John Ossoff won those counties at a smaller percentage than Warnock did. Warnock won more votes than Ossoff did in the state of Georgia. And some people are like, how did this Black man win more votes, right, than this white man did? And part of it is to move outside of Metropolitan Atlanta and to move inside of, the other smaller metropolitan spaces that we have inside of Georgia, as well as moving to those rural spaces to speak with them. What we have seen inside the state is that people go to their corners when it comes to the politics. So the Democrats only talk to the people that vote Democrat traditionally, and the Republicans tend to vote for those that vote Republican traditionally. The Trumpian factor had played very high here, where you had, for example, Keir Bordeaux won a congressional seat right next to Lucy McBath's seat, and that seat had been Republican for quite some time. We're unsure at this moment if Bordeaux is a strong candidate, or because the other candidate was extremely Trumpian, if that Trumpianism played a role in turning off some of those traditional Republican voters in that particular district. And so instead of voting for that Trumpian candidate, went toward Bordeaux, who is the Democratic representative now in that space. So there's a lot to unpack, a lot to really understand. You know, with all of the recent tape of the former president coming out and pressuring another person in the Secretary of State's office, and to see if the former president will have some type of influence over the candidates running statewide for 2022 will be an interesting space to witness, to see if he will have an impact on Georgia politics for the statewide race. The last point that I want to note is when it comes to the young people vote. The young people vote has while the young people vote may have increased, it is still low. It is still low. When we look at Fulton County, for example, Fulton County is the largest county inside of Georgia. Fulton County's the Black male vote, 18 to 24, was only at about 31%. Whereas compared to the Black woman vote at that same age group was less than 40%. So young people aren't voting at the rate that you would hope that they would. If young people would have voted, but only in Fulton County, at another 5 to 10 percentage point higher, we would not have been in a runoff situation in the state of Georgia because of how much of the vote is in Fulton County. They have over 800,000 registered voters in that county. So when we look at it from that perspective, in taking the totality of what's going on here, we are not really focusing, paying attention, continuously educating, particularly those young people who make up a good percentage, particularly in these metropolitan spaces, to participate. And if they did, then we can talk about Georgia being a blue state. However, because we don't have young people participating at least 40 to 50%, then we're running into this, competitiveness where we may not really need to be, right? So I look forward to your questions. And I don't have the schedule in front of me. Is there anyone else on the call who's to present today? No? Okay. So I guess we'll open it up for questions if you have any. Let me know if I need to unmute you. I think you can unmute yourself. Yeah.
I've got a question.
Sure.
You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you to you both for your presentations. Dr. Greer, this one's for you in particular. I'm struck by that really low turnout that you pointed out of the young Black voters. And so I'm curious if you have thoughts on why they proved rather resistant to those kind of intensive organizing and recruitment efforts that were taking place.
So I'm not really sure. I'm not sure. That's one of the spaces where it's really difficult to pinpoint. I know that social media had played a large role, even in some of the students, in their perspective on what's happening. Social media is very targeted, and particularly when it comes to young Black males, social media can be very targeted with seeping into the fears that already exist. And so what I heard a lot was, we really can't trust Kamala Harris because of her work as a prosecutor and the Attorney General when she was in California. And so the time that it took to explain that, as a prosecutor, you follow the law. So if you're angry at the person following the law, maybe the law is the thing that needs to be changed. To have that type of conversation, it is very nuanced and lengthy sometimes because there's a back and forth with it. However, it's just very difficult because of the way that the messagings they receive cosigns their existing fear. And so it's almost as if nothing you say could make a difference. I don't know if that's helpful. And for some reason, the alternative, the Trump administration, seemed to be a better fit, even if they didn't vote.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Oh, I actually have two now. One is, have you considered or compared that youth turnout levels among Black voters in other places? Because when we've looked at samples, and I don't remember ironically what it is for 2020, but the under 25 turnout has been much lower than media would suggest. The great youth turnout has never, like when you go back to Obama's election, it went up 1 percentage point from 2004, or like 2. I mean, yet it was all of this hoopla over something happening. So that's one question: how different was it? And 30 doesn't seem that bad. The other one is, on the other side, how targeted were if you can tell me, because it's not part of your research, the calls for investigation of vote quote fraud on Black counties in Georgia, since you've mentioned all of those counties. I've heard of Cobb County and a few others, but so for those of us who don't live in Georgia, I would like to sort of get a better sense of how surgical or non-surgical those attacks might have been, because obviously they can come around again in other elections.
Right. So so for those counties, the vast majority of the counties that make up Metropolitan Atlanta are historically majority white. Mm. So when I saw Cobb County go Democratic, I was shocked because of, I'm like, what? That is not a thing, right? That is not a thing that takes place. Douglas County used to be majority white and has, several Confederate statues there, and there have been protests around there. We know that some of the other counties, like Clayton County, is majority Black, very poor and distressed. It's ripe for gentrification. Henry County is the same. DeKalb County, interestingly, voted over 80% for the Democratic candidates. Fulton County is separated in North Fulton and South Fulton. And this North Fulton is majority white, and for some time has wanted to change Georgia's constitution so they can be a separate county from Fulton County. But we'd have to change the constitution for that, and there's no appetite for it. So when it comes to targeting the messages, I think that here, even some Republicans were offended at the former president's attempt to get, the Secretary of State to overturn the election and talk about fraud. Some of them were very angry at that. And if you've seen any of the news conferences, you saw that anger. So I'm not sure if that changed many minds, because even the officials within Georgia who were victims of the harassment by the former president still openly said, I still voted for him, or I'm still going to vote for him. I just don't like him doing these things. While others were like, par for the course. He's just wanting to make sure that it was a safe and free election, and only, legal votes were counted. What's interesting is the current legislation that is going through the General Assembly have nothing to do to address the concerns that were raised by the former president or anyone discussing voter fraud. So these are all attempts to push back some of the progress that was made by Georgia having an open system. where people can vote absentee, no excuse absentee balloting, which incidentally was created specifically for Republican voters in mind. So, you know, having changed those was very interesting. I hope that answered your question. Okay. There's a question in the chat. Do you, and I'm assuming it's me, think that HBCU's organization and presence in Georgia for Warnock gave him more votes than Ossoff? Perhaps that helped him overcome votes that Ossoff lost due to factors such as anti-Semitism. One could argue that. At the same time, some of the counties that Warnock won more than Ossoff has a higher rate of white voters than Black voters. So while I hear you on that point, and I take the point, that was very interesting. In another space, I would like to explore this anti-Semitism because it's interesting to me how Christian conservatives are pro-Israel, yet participate in anti-Semitic tropes here in the United States. So I like to explore that more somewhere down the line. What helped Ossoff though was that in those conservative, inside of some of those counties that had a higher rate of white voters, there was a great push from different religious organizations to publicly denounce and fight back some of those anti-Semitic messages that were put out there. So I don't know, it's just interesting. However, to note that in the Ossoff race, it was less votes cast overall than in the Warnock race. So there's an interesting dynamic there. Are there any other questions?
I have a question. So thank you both, Dr. Greer and Dr. Morris, for the presentation. My question is for Dr. Morris around, you made a statement that I guess I've kind of hung on to about how Black voters are mobilized by the issues and not the candidates. And I guess I just want to know if you could just talk a little bit more about that, and particularly how you saw evidence of that through the recent, through the 2016 polling work that you all did at Howard.
Okay, thank you for the question. I don't have a complete answer, but I was always struck by the big blip in the Obama vote in 2012 as opposed to 2008 when he was elected, and the ways in which people answered survey questions about it. And there are too many questions that go into making up my impression, but one of the things that struck me in relationship to that was the drop-off in 2016. And the drop-off in 2016 was largely related to a huge increase in white voter turnout. So that it seems to be an interplay of race. If race becomes salient in these elections, you get several reactions. And usually the white electorate does not respond well to racial issues, unless of course you're extremely conservative right-wing. And I think that, and to some extent, 2020 marked a change in that expression. So what happened with Obama was that there was not beyond the idea of the first Black president in the survey responses we got on any other issue, there seemed to be no particular link. And so when the turnout went up, but it didn't go up dramatically. It just went up as it had been going up before, if you count the census data doesn't show that well, but if you look at others, like a Pew survey, and I couldn't show that there, but it goes up relatively dramatically in 2012. There are the Jackson decline, the Democratic decline in vote, again, shows, I think, not so much that Jackson was ever thought to be a candidate of viability, because he wasn't, but it was the conflict that those of us who are old enough to remember surrounded Dukakis, who was clearly, and Mondale, both of whom were clearly sympathetic to the Black electorate and all of these other things, but that the issues they had were very salient. So everyone said back then that because Jesse stayed Democratic and was supportive, that he would bring out Black voters. It's exactly the opposite. And I don't want to name the books that said that it would, but and Linda Williams and I did a paper saying that it would not happen, and it did not happen. And one of the reasons it did not happen is because the candidate, magical as Jesse Jackson may have been, can't carry the consciousness. And people like him is fine; they might react to him, but for example, pick an ancient example. The Black vote went up dramatically in 1968 for Humphrey. I'm sorry, for Humphrey, but turnout didn't go up dramatically after you take out the increase in eligibility from the 65 Voter Rights Act. In other words, preferences are individual in candidates, but mobility isn't. There's something about, as I call it, stepping in. So in 2020, and this is where the research stops and says, because I can't look at the data well enough in the time that I've had with it, but it seems to me that in some extent, Trump sucked the racism out of the system, meaning that the Democratic Party and civilized politics were against it. It made it a single party activity. It made it something that Blacks could oppose significantly, but they didn't show up dramatically like they would in other situations, like they might have in other situations. In other words, the threat of racism makes them oppose the racists, but it doesn't mobilize them in the same way, because it is the question of whether or not the system is going to be overtaken by it or not, and the individualization of it. The candidate, if you lock everything to the candidate, you liberate, to some extent, the voters to be mobilized or not. And again, it's somewhat speculative. Obviously, there's no overwhelming theory here, but you can't ignore the fact that in some of the critical issues where the candidate shined, the turnout did not. And I think that might be true and except for the magical work in Georgia, I suppose, of people mobilizing turnout, who knows?
I had a question for Dr. Morris. I was interested in your findings specifically about Kamala Harris impacting the Democratic ticket. And I wanted to ask, why do you think people believed Harris improved the ticket? Do you think it was rooted in representation? And I wanted to ask why you thought like about 15% thought she worsened the ticket, and if that was rooted in like misogynoir or negative stereotypes about Black women.
Well, some of our group wanted to do in-person sessions on it, and I haven't gotten the results from that, talking to people. And yeah, and since she has the Howard link and we have all of these biases, we think they should all be shot, myself. But that's, to be more serious, you're only gonna get my opinion. I think some of it was sexism, and I think it's a more kind of generalized sexism than sexism against Black women. I think part of it is that there might have been some hesitancy about any Black VP adding to the ticket because they think it would provoke racism. So you get some liberal people saying that, well, the society is too racist, even though Obama was the candidate. And the other, I think, is that she did not look like an issue person. The stuff that's on the social on the Twitter network, all the stuff that I don't listen to, according to students that I still talk to, said that she was the attorney who increased capital punishment, who did all of those things. In other words, she could still be a sympathetic Black person, but she did not represent the issues. And so, while I'm not saying that fits into my perspective about issues, it was the thing that went against her. And so the more you knew about her, because she wasn't independently, I think, nationally famous, the issues came with her. Whereas when Obama was independently nationally famous, before anybody knew he did any other thing other than be a Black senator from a long time from anywhere else, and then suddenly he was running for president. He had no issues. She had issues that were race related that weren't necessarily bad, but she was separate from the leadership in those issues. And of course, we know she's doing a great job, but that's after the fact.
I also forgot to point out with all of my notes that when I made mention that, if we had a larger turnout, particularly among young people, then we would not have been in a runoff situation. And I've been arguing since 2012 that Georgia should be a Democratic state in terms of the offices. Yet we don't have the voter turnout that we should. So, for example, in the 2016 presidential race, 1.4 million Georgians didn't vote. In the 2018 gubernatorial race with Stacey Abrams, 2.5 almost Georgians didn't vote. And in this past presidential race, you had about 2.3 million Georgians who did not vote. So the level of turnout is very great. So we have less than 70% turnout rate, and those margins make a huge difference in the long run. So when we talk about get out the vote and so forth, we're not really playing a long game. We're playing a very short game where we try to do a lot in a few short months, rather than getting folks prepared along the way, so those efforts can pay off. So I forgot to make that point, and I wanted to make that point. Yeah.
Could I ask a question about that?
Yes, of course.
How effective do you think Stacey Abrams will be in mobilizing the next set of Black voters, even if she's running or not running? I mean, can you make a projection based on, and I'm not just talking, whatever organization she has in Georgia, how effective do you think it might be in going into 22 or in some later election in turnout?
So, right. So, in Georgia, the number of Black voters in Georgia is, hovering 30%. So it has to be more than just Black votes to get them out. And then, when it comes to the Black vote, the Black vote isn't doing it, because when she ran for office, over 900,000 Black people who were registered to vote didn't vote. So there's a tremendous amount of inactivity going on. And as you said, is it, the person, or is it the policies? And are we clear on what policies are? Or, are we enthusiastic about the person? So that's an interesting way to think about it. So I'm not sure really about that particular, about her impact on the Black vote, because, it has been argued in Georgia that, the trend in terms of the gubernatorial races has been trending down in terms of the margin of victory between the Democratic and Republican candidate. So, her margin of non-victory in 2018 was at one of the lowest points in terms of the difference between the Republican and Democratic candidate. Yet and still, we had almost 1 million Black people who didn't participate. So to have a historic race where you could have the first and only Black woman to be governor in the history of this country, still didn't do it to mobilize folks to come out and to participate. So I'm not sure. I guess that's my response to that. It's really, really unclear. All right. Are there any other questions?
This is a question for both of the panelists. So in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and the increase in mail-in ballots in places like Georgia, and with the new bills that are being passed that are trying to restrict voting rights, how likely is it that we're going to be able to galvanize ourselves on the same level in a 2024 election or in the elections in the next 2 years?
So I would, so here's the thing for me. if you know the rules of the game, can we play within the rules in order to gain enough positions in order to change the rules back? So if even from a statewide perspective, the governor has been silent on these changes that have gone through the General Assembly. The Secretary of State did not preside, the Lieutenant Governor did not preside over the General Assembly when these votes were going through, didn't want to be associated with them, because all of them have been on record with, there was nothing wrong. Our elections were the most secure that they have been. Why are you trying to change some of these fundamental aspects of the voting process? You know, we can tighten up on a couple of other things, yet why are you doing this? So it is unclear what they're going to do. At the same time, we will still have 3 weeks of early voting in Georgia. We will still have, you still will have the ability to vote anywhere in your county during those 3 weeks. You could still be able to vote on the weekends, even though they will cut down the weekend vote. My question back to organizations will be, will we then educate about those parameters, and will we mobilize for those parameters, rather than sitting back saying these parameters are wrong and then discouraging people from going out to participate? Because the more people we can get out to participate, as I said, we can change the way the General Assembly looks in order to change those laws back. We can change who's in the governor's seat and then change those laws back. So that would be my question and challenge to, you know, those that are mobilizing and educating within the state, a lot of the nonprofit organizations and these nonpartisan organizations. That would be my question to them, and my challenge to them is, it doesn't, some of these rule changes, you know, like I voted absentee. Why? Because I could, right? I did it for almost all of them except for the final race, the runoff. Am I offended by it? Yeah. Will I still vote early as I always do? Yes. Because that's within the space of what we can do. So.
Well, I'd like to add that I think the evidence of polls from 2020 is that the greatest amount of motivation to turn out was for those people who took early voting and mail voting as a conscious resistance to the threat to it. When you think about Black politics, electoral politics, it still has its roots in movement politics when it is viable and when it is effective. And some of these restraints remind us of the one period in which the Black electorate, again, I go back to turnout exceeded that of white vote, 2012. And that was because of the 2 or 3 years before that, we were under the greatest voting rights attack ever. And they became mobilizing symbols. And I think that as Dr. Greer suggested, you can keep down some of the constraints, so others might become mobilizing symbols. One sticks in mind, not from Georgia, but from Arizona, where giving food and water to somebody standing in line is supposed to be outlawed. Now, you can imagine the mobilizing potential
That's
from an
Georgia.
early threat to that. I mean,
that's
those things
Dr. Morris,
are the
that's
things
Georgia.
that,
I'm sorry.
those
That
things
was
are the things that civil rights movements built. And I think that you can mobilize people, and some of these are just totally tacky. And of course, they will be defeated, but those that aren't can help to become symbols of mobilization where the issue surpasses voting technical issues and comes down to simple access, but that simple access becomes a kind of global issue. And I think that you can get people out to vote as long as you don't see them as ordinary and let them pass. And I think, you know, one of the persistence of the Black Lives Matter movement around police violence has to do with the recurrence of the symbols of provocation.
I apologize.
And these voting rights suppressing things, I don't know if they're bad, they're tacky.
I apologize, Dr. Morris. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Okay.
That's Georgia, where it would be a misdemeanor to offer food or water to anyone to stand in line.
Well,
And you know,
I was born 2 months after my mother left Georgia, so I figure I have some responsibility.
And you know, the governor in Georgia has the power of line item veto and can scratch through, you know, some items. So we don't know what will pass. Crossover day was this week. And so we'll see what happens, you know, after crossover, and to see the vote count and to see what happens with the governor. Are there any other questions? No? We did an amazing job. Yeah.
You did do an amazing job. I get so nervous with Dr. Morris that I can't ask a question. I should have put something in chat, but one of the things I wanted to know was about the mobilization of AKAs, because that did have some benefit for Kamala Harris. And also, you know, during with Joe Biden being associated with the crime bill and Kamala Harris being associated with the prosecutor, I had so many young folks say that they just rather, they know who Trump is, but these individuals actually did something that was against us. So why would I vote against our interests? This is not Obama's time anymore. He didn't, you know, so you get that rhetoric around young people as well. So those, I'm sorry, I get so nervous, I'm sorry, with Dr. Morris, but those are my two questions.
Those are good points.
Observations.
I think it's almost like Obama being married to Michelle. I mean, if it hadn't been Michelle or somebody in her demographic characteristics, I think he would have had a hard time getting elected. I think if she hadn't gone to an HBCU and if she didn't have that visible social sororities around her, I think she would have had a harder time getting the kind of sympathetic response that she did get. And of course, the issues that you raise are relevant for young people because they talk about those things since, I don't know who these social media mobilizers are, but they seem to be moderately to conservative and ever present. I'm glad I don't know how to tweet. I don't know.
Anyone else? No? All right. Well, I guess we can finish early.
Good.
Okay. Well, we appreciate you all coming and spending some time with us. We hope that we provided some insight to your understanding, and we appreciate you, and let us know how we can be of service.
May I say one more thing?
Oh, yeah.
Special thanks to Dr. Greer for stepping in as moderator, since our moderator is AWOL. I really appreciate that, and we should be thankful for it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank y'all so much. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for the great panel.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye, Naja.
Bye, Dr. Morris.
Bye, oh, bye, Stanford.
Good to see you. Good to see you using technology.
Barely. Oh, he missed it. I'm cutting you out of here. I can't get out of here.
Of course you can't. There's a button at the bottom that says leave.
It's okay. It's okay. I didn't want
but
to.
You're still there. I hit the leave button and you're still there.
This is my dissertation about. We just go at it back and forth.
Oh, no, he age abuse. Now I'm back. I'm turning for age abuse.
Okay, low mode.
There you go. Y'all take care.
All right,
Thank you.